How a confused probationary prisoner killed his ex. In the heart of this community, a baffling enigma emerges, sparking unsettling questions about justice and second chances. How does a man, weighed down by the shackles of his own violent past, spiral into a vortex of horrifying crime? Does a confused probationer have the potential to become a cold-blooded killer? A once cherished relationship that has been lost in a sea of violence awaits your exploration in this frightening video. So tune in as we unmask the haunting truth. Stay curious, stay vigilant. An unexpected act of terror took place in the middle of the night in the residential area of South Chicago, and it was enough to send shivers down the spines of even the most jaded residents of the neighborhood. This macabre drama centered on Stephen Hawthorne, a guy with a troubled history who wore the infamous badge of a convicted killer and was teetering on the brink of another trial involving firearms. Hawthorne, a seasoned man who had lived through 56 winters, set out on a tenacious quest as the starry sky wrapped itself about the city. His target was a young woman named Tamara Washington, who was 26 years old. Even though there was a gap of 30 years between their ages, the two individuals had a troubled past together, a past that had left behind unseen wounds that were doomed to bleed again in the future. Hawthorne sneaked into Washington's shelter, armed with the frigid steel of a 9mm handgun and the icy resolve in his heart. Washington's sanctuary was his target. He crept his way through the poorly lighted rooms until he reached the one in which his unwary victims were soundly dozing off, unaware of the danger that was about to occur to them. The tranquility was shattered by a thundering shot, which was followed by a bullet that lodged itself in the head of Washington's partner, Norman Redden, who was 51 years old. The echoes of the gunshot shocked the household awake, striking fear into the hearts of Washington's two young kids and her uncle, who was 63 years old. Hawthorne followed closely behind them as they made their way to a stairwell in the hopes that it would act as a stronghold against the chaos that was escalating. Both of his hands were covered in blood as he fought with Washington's uncle for control of the weapon. The piercing sound of two guns blasted out into the darkness, but mercifully, neither of them hit their intended victim. Hawthorne was scared enough to flee the scene after being tricked by the brave uncle, who pretended to be injured so that he could get away from the terrifying scene. As Hawthorne's desire for blood increased, he doggedly pursued his prey. He fired his weapon and wounded Washington in the arm as she made a frantic attempt to flee to the safety of a nearby residence. The terrible action was captured by a camera attached to a doorbell, and it showed Hawthorne taking down Washington while converting his weapon from a lethal shooter to a ruthless bludgeon as he repeatedly struck her. Nevertheless, Washington managed to escape from her abductor during a brief window of opportunity. She was in such a desperate situation that she tried to get the attention of a passing vehicle that might have been able to help her out of her dreadful predicament. However, Hawthorne, being the predator that he was, pointed his weapon at the driver, who was unprepared for it, and ordered them to keep moving, which had the effect of stopping them in their tracks. As the car pulled away, the people inside observed a tragic sight. Washington's children were strolling in the pavement, dressed only in their pajamas, and terror was written across the expressions in their innocent faces. Quickly taking action, they hurried the youngsters into the relative protection of their car and then dialed the police while their hearts hammered in their chests. Washington was taken captive once more by the ruthless and unrelenting Hawthorne, who subjected her to yet another round of harsh beatings. After enduring several torturous minutes, he went to a nearby parking lot and obtained what eyewitnesses would likely refer to as either a large rock or boulder. He attacked Washington's skull with terrible and primitive cruelty, raining heavy blows down on Washington's head. Hawthorne made a fruitless effort to flee as the high-pitched siren signaled the approach of the law enforcement officers. Nevertheless, he was captured, and the blood of his victims splattered across his hands and clothes when they were discovered. Along the route he had planned to take in order to flee, the terrified man had thrown away the gun that had caused him so much trouble. Hawthorne was arrested immediately and charged with murder as well as attempted murder. Judge Kelly McCarthy made the decision ruling that Hawthorne should be detained without possibility of posting bail. It's ironic because at the time of the tragic event, Hawthorne was out on bond for an earlier case involving unlawful weapon use, which stemmed from a routine traffic stop earlier that year. The charges stem from Hawthorne's use of a weapon in violation of court order. In a cruel twist of fate, the GPS tracker he was required to wear as a condition of his release ended up functioning as a creepy breadcrumb trail that led from his place of employment to the location of his horrible spree. The courtroom was filled with the reverberation of Hawthorne's earlier life. In 1983, when he was still a teenager, he was tried for murder and found guilty. He was first sentenced to life in prison for the crime. However, his original sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole was overturned by the United States Supreme Court in 2012, and he was given a new term of 60 years in prison instead. He was released in 2017 as a result of the convoluted processes involved in the legal system, which paved the ground for his violent rampage on that fortuitous night. The situation involving Stephen Hawthorne raises important considerations concerning whether or not individuals with a history of violent behavior should be given second chances. Some people believe that people who have such criminal history should never be offered the possibility of an early release, regardless of their age. On the other hand, advocates of rehabilitation contend that adolescents may not fully realize the repercussions of their acts and that they can be adequately rehabilitated as adults. They say this despite the fact that adults can undergo rehab as well. This case sheds light on the ongoing discussion that surrounds the concept of rehabilitating people after they've engaged in criminal behavior. Friends of Hawthorne claimed that there had been recurring conflicts between him and Tamara over his personal possessions that were left at her apartment. Although the reason for Hawthorne's terrible act is still unknown, it was disclosed that there had been disputes. It's possible that the matter got more problematic because of Hawthorne's limited experience with women. Since his release, he had only dated 2 different women. These facts, however, are of little consolation to the families and loved ones of Tamara Washington and Norman Redden, whose lives were cut short in a sad accident. The case of Tamara Washington and Norman Redden serves as a reminder of the dark places that humans may go, as well as the challenges that come with trying to rehabilitate violent offenders. It calls into question the efficacy of the monitoring mechanisms as well as the decision-making processes that resulted in Hawthorne's release on bond, despite the fact that he was still facing charges. The tragedy also highlights the necessity of community awareness and action, as well as the need for additional investigation into support networks for victims of domestic abuse. The tragic events surrounding the killings of Tamara Washington and Norman Redden have left a lasting impression on the community and have sparked conversations about rehabilitation, second chances, and the shortcomings of the justice system. As we pause to reflect on this terrible incident, we have a responsibility to make it our mission to draw lessons from it and work toward building a society that places a premium on the health and safety of its members, all the while giving serious thought to the consequences of giving second chances to those with a history of violent behavior. As we draw the curtain on this disquieting saga of shattered lives and twisted intentions, we urge you, our vigilant audience, to reflect, to question, and above all, to act. Your voice, your stand against such horrors, could be the beacon that guides a life away from the precipice of such violent outcomes. Before we bid you adieu, remember to hit the like button if this story stirred something within you, and subscribe for more chilling chronicles of crime and justice. Share this video, keep the conversation alive, and together we can be the harbinger of change.